Good evening. Good evening. Welcome to Tisa's Vance and Musings. Can you believe it's Thursday already? Okay, we have a good show for you tonight. We got some dialogue we got to continue to have, and we're ending out our Black History Month. So come on in the room. You know I ain't gonna be able to wait for too many folk because I have to give these. These people like to they like to tell you stuff, give you history lessons, educate you. Okay. So I got to give them all the time I can possibly afford so that we can get into this dialogue. So I can't wait long. Let me know you're here. Drop some comments, say hi. I'll try to shout you out before we get started. Just let me know. Let me know that you're here. I'm hoping I'm seeing everybody. Let me just make sure that I'm seeing y'all. Yes. Hey, LA Justice. Good evening. All right. Let me make sure that you guys are with me. It's always a little delay. So if you're saying hello, it's coming. Hey, Crystal. Good to see you. Hey, Valerie. Good to see you. All right. I'm good because we got stuff to talk about. All right. All right. I will go ahead and get started as the folk come on in. Y'all come on in. Welcome to another episode of Tisa's Vance and Musings. Yay! We are rounding out the month that is called Black History Month. We have been having some really serious, thought-provoking, and authentic dialogue around critical race theory, right? Around what does it mean? And then we transitioned into talking about the Black Church documentary. And that led us down all sorts of roads and paths, and we've been in the backwoods. Okay, we're gonna try to see if we can come out the backwoods today with a good finale. Okay, because there's still questions to be answered. When we last left, Pastor Rodney was going, and he was talking about the secular church, and we was talking about church of the streets and stuff. So listen, I hope you're ready, prepared and to dialogue with us about the Black church now, right? Where do we go from now? Are we in an identity crisis? If they're called, if gatherings on the street are being called church, what does that mean for the traditional Black church, right? Or are we just in the middle of a makeover? I don't know. So I got my scholars here. So please give a warm welcome to my girl, my sister, Reverend Katina Blackman Jackson, who is here looking so pretty. Okay. And then our resident we just calling these the resident theologians. Our other resident theologian, Pastor Rodney Lynch, who set this all off, okay, with his rants about critical race theory. Hey, Lakeisha. Okay. And then our brother, the smooth one, Reverend Fred Sullivan, okay, who come in with his intellectually smooth self while we hollering. He come in with an even keel and drop all the message. Okay, I love this group. It's so beautiful.
Balance to this thing.
That's right.
Yeah.
I love it. I love it. I love how you guys interact with each other and how you bring the knowledge and you take some of the scholarly information and make it where we can all understand it. So listen, as you heard me already saying, we left on a note of so much we talk about with this Black church, whether or not, we're in this identity crisis where the documentary mentioned how young people started a movement that didn't and wasn't birthed out of the Black church, right? And then they started gathering on streets and they were mentioning how that was church. And Rodney, I'm gonna throw it to you first because you kind of put it out there about one of those questions I think you threw out there, which was, okay, what kind of allowed that to happen is that the church stopped meeting the needs of the people. We're not meeting the needs of the people, right? And so I thought that might be a good place to start, only because when I hear, and I can only tell you what I hear, when I hear people say, the church needs to meet the needs of the people, I agree wholeheartedly, because I started with the rant about the church hasn't been a holistic place. We've focused so much on the spiritual man. We didn't focus on the actual physical community, all of that kind of good stuff. But then I worry, on the other hand, that when we focus so much on meeting practical needs, that it becomes about consumerism. Then you have people coming to the church and they switch churches back and forth based on who can give them what they want, right? It becomes the ideologies kind of, I'm going to get mine, get what I can get from it, and not necessarily reinvest. So help us. Like, how do we strike a balance, or do we need a balance? Should we even be worried about that? Where are we? What are we doing?
So, as I was watching the documentary, I saw something that was really, I had never thought of. And that is when the Great Migration had happened, right? My family was part of that Great Migration from Alabama, from like 53 to 68. And so, as I watched the documentary and this Great Migration, many of them came from the South who had nothing.
Right.
But what was pointed out in the documentary is that the church, the Black church that was established up north, met their needs. And then the next thing you know, the church became mega. Because that's what happened. That's what the documentary showed. And then when it showed Jeremiah Wright, if you haven't read the Sankofa Moment, you need to read that book. Jeremiah Wright, Trinity United Church of Christ in Chicago, he came there, had like 80 members or something like that. Left there. He's a pastor emeritus. Passed it on to Otis Marks III with like 8,000 members. You know why? Because that church on the south side of Chicago, Doc, was meeting the need of the people. And so we, when folks talk about, or some white folks want to talk about John MacArthur types, the social gospel is heresy. Which obviously they don't understand they don't know who Jesus is. Obviously, because if you're going to say the social gospel is heresy, then Jesus must be a heretic, because he definitely dealt with people and he never left nobody in the same state that they were. He never told nobody you be all right in the by and by when you get to heaven. No, he dealt with their need right then and there, and so and then I think about again hearing that sermon by Raphael Warnock, when he talked about our praise and our prayers ought to connect with protests. And so perhaps this is what I'm arguing tonight. Perhaps.
Go ahead and rant.
That God has answered our prayers, because the prayers of the righteous availeth much. And God has responded to our praise, because God inhabits the praises of his people. And it looks like the Black Lives Matter movement. And through that type of protest. Now, no, the Black Lives Matter movement is not steeped in any religious tradition, but it is steeped in liberation and freedom, and particularly Black liberation and Black freedom, which was the purpose of the Black church in the beginning. It was birthed fighting for freedom. And so that's what the Black Lives Matter movement is about. And that's how God is responding through us. It maybe, again, it may not be seeped in any religious tradition, but it is seeped in Black liberation theology.
Wow.
Perhaps.
Well, I would argue that maybe it is. I would argue that maybe it is steeped in religious tradition, because the Black church is there, and we are the Black church. And we are out in those streets, right, protesting. And I agree with Rodney. Wherever the Spirit of the Lord is, there is liberty. And therefore, there's a liberation gospel that's being preached, that's being manifested in the protests and the prayers and the songs that are being sung. They may not sound like the old Negro spirituals we used to. However, there is a song that's being sung in the streets.
Katina, we're losing you just a little bit. I don't know if it's your connection or what's happening.
Okay,
But
I'll come out and come back in.
You're gonna come out and come back in? All right. Fred, you wanna get in here while she's
I think it might be worth mentioning that we're not looking at one light going off and another light going on. There may be expressions of liberation in other places. Is it? I don't know. What all of these things look like, and I'm not sure. Was it Reverend Tracy Blackman that was talking about This Is Church from the documentary? I mean, I didn't fly out to Ferguson. I don't have her experience in the church, in ministry, with people. I mean, I just haven't done what she's done and done as much of it. But I don't think that is a singular or a unique expression of church. And there are people out in various protests and activities and actions in those past months. But whatever expression, these things are undertaking in various contexts right now. I think there was something in my community just this evening, which maybe I was a little late to because I didn't find it. But, there are things that are going on in various places, but it's not if it's not here, it's over there type of thing. It's not even really, I think, on an institutional basis that the church has just abdicated its role. I think that there are places where things are happening. I mean, because Jeremiah Wright was doing what Jeremiah Wright was doing. Baba J, they called him today, as Proctor closed, as he was doing that which he was doing as the pastor. You probably wouldn't have had to go very far in Chicago to find someone who was holding on to some sort of dominion theology in a Black context. And operating antithetical to what it was that he was doing within his church. I haven't read that book, Rodney, but I would venture to guess that he also encountered some resistance within the confines of that building also. Just people saying, we don't take all that. We don't need all this African stuff. All of that business that you're talking about is not the way to go. I just happen to think that this thing is contextual. And we'll be in various places and spaces where there is no identity crisis, where people are clear that we're working on liberation and we are interested in the furtherance of this particular community and specifically, but in general, communities of color around the nation, around the world. And I think that we have to just leave some space for that because, hey, every movement may not start in the church, it may not end in the church, but think about this. And going back to Warnock, since Rodney brought Reverend Dr. Warnock up, in his book, he begins to talk about how the Black church is born in this moment, responding to the spiritual needs of the people, but also having to protest the inhumane treatment that they were receiving, right? So yeah, that's the case. And yes, they are leading people in this expression that affirms their own value in life and that God is right. Our piety is rooted in the fact that God loves us and we ought to love God. And you ought to do what the book say do, and the book don't say it's okay for you to denigrate me and to mistreat me. So that's one thing. But he also says there's a divided mind in that after enslavement ends, not long as we enter the 20th century, folks stop being interested in some of those things. So in the same concentrations. So clearly you have churches that are meeting needs as folk make their way up in the migration. My parents are in the tail end of the migration, coming up here from Florida, refugees from a formerly Jim Crow South. And here we have a situation where churches are meeting their needs. And then what did they say happened? And I think it was Bishop Jakes that makes the statement. The folks had jobs. The folks had homes. The folks had careers. Their needs changed. So now what are we trying? What are we facing? What are we doing?
Exactly.
How are we helping? And that brings up the economic reality. It was wide then, it has widened since then. There's never been a time where there's been such a dichotomy within Black communities between the haves and the have-nots. So now you have churches that may have to deal with those class distinctions, and just like it happened during the Great Migrations, folks are coming up from the South, and you've got these distinctions in worship and in education and economic potential. What do you do with that? How do we handle it within the church? Leading us back to your point with respect to identity crisis. Who are we, and what is it that we're really trying to do?
Right.
Yeah. So then let me play the other side advocate. I hate saying devil's advocate, but let me.
You don't need no help.
Exactly. You don't need no advocacy efforts from me. Okay. Well, let me ask this, right? Because it reminds me of a question that one of our professors threw up at us about our point of reference, where we start with our point of reference, and it seems like when we talk about the Black church, our point of reference is the point of the oppression of being here in these Americas, right? But I'm wondering though, and I'm agreeing with everything you're saying, but are we losing sight of the original purpose Christ had for the church, right? Which wasn't just meeting the needs, but it also had that dual role of saving souls, right? It had that, like the whole work of the gospel had a dual effort, right? He came to save the lost, right? In multiple ways. That's multiple ways. So my question is, when we start saying the church is shifting, when we start saying that the church is on the street now just because people are gathering and protesting and people are in doing the work of liberation, which is indeed God's work, are we dismissing the other role, which is we are all gospel preachers, right? So the other part of that is still the preaching of the gospel. I feel like we can't lose the cross. We can't lose, the blood of Jesus in the work of liberation, which is why I believe there's still a distinct difference between what someone can get on the street corners at a rally and what they're supposed to be able to encounter in a church.
Can I say this one quick thing, and then I really want to hear what everybody else has to say. And Katina's back now, and she probably wants to say something too. But I just want to say this one thing real quick. Now we got to start being particular about this language. If we're going to talk Black church, now Black church doesn't mean just Black Christian church, although we try to make it such with respect to Black church, Black Christian church, Black Protestant Christian church. I think we have to be a little bit more particular about what's going on, because there may be some frames in there that, hey, listen, I preach Jesus. I pastor a Baptist church, Baptist born, Baptist I will die. But that's me. And the church is larger than me. So I just want to throw that in there in terms of our discussion. What does this mean to call ourselves a Black church, but then have all of these other expressions out there?
Right. Black church is not monolithic. Come on in here, Katina. Welcome back.
Thank you. Glad to be back. Can you all hear me just fine now? Okay.
Yes.
Okay, great. I just wanted to emphasize a point that Rodney was making when it comes to how we look at and define the church, and that I believe that seeing those Black Lives Matter protesters out there, that they were still representing the Black church, because a lot of what we saw is representative of what we saw in the 60s during the movement, where there were songs being sung. They may not have been the old Negro spirituals, but there were still songs being sung that soothed the soul so that they could stand out there and protest for the number of days consistently that they protested. And because we're there, we represent the church, and wherever the Spirit of the Lord is, there is liberty. And so because this is a liberation gospel, we in our actions are representing that which Christ represents, which is unconditional love for all of humanity, which also includes, unfortunately, we have to specify that, all Black lives. And so when we talk about what church should look like, and if it should just stick with preaching the salvific, redemptive word of deliverance for humanity so that we can be in eternity with Christ, I am a gospel preacher. There is balance. I believe in personal piety, but also believe in social piety. I believe in social holiness, where we come together in love, representing Christ here on the earth, and that it's not just the gospel beyond this transition here on earth, but what it looks like to live a holy life here while we're still here on earth. And so I think the church has a large task ahead of us in that. What does it mean to be a Christian in America? What does it mean to live holy now in America? And how do we represent that? Because it's more than just going to church on Sunday, right, Wednesday, right, whatever Bible study is, but how are you living out that soul salvation? And it's right up to us as gospel preachers to make the gospel truth plain, that when we say, be ye holy, this is what be ye holy looks like. This is what be ye holy sounds like. This is what be ye holy means. It means that you have to embrace all of your brothers and sisters walking the planet, not just the ones that are your neighbor next door, but the one across the street or down the block,
right,
who may not be in your socioeconomic class,
right, or of your gender orientation.
Right.
Correct.
I think that I thought about this today. I think we're at a moment where we need to reclaim or reestablish who we are, number one, as a Black church. We have to acknowledge where we are. And then also remember whose we are, right? We belong to God. We are God's people, called by God's name. I heard Kelly Brown Douglas today with something that they were doing with at Union, talk about, what is the Black church, right? To Fred's point. And she basically said the Black church has to do with the accountability of our history and the accountability to our community. Accountability to our history, to the hush harbors back there, right? And accountability to our community today. It plays a role in the Black life, the legacy of struggle for survival and holiness and helping Black people. The Black church is the religious and social center. For her, that's how she defined it. Ain't got nothing to do with your pigmentation. Ain't got nothing to do with the numbers, 80% or what. Ain't got nothing to do with that. But it has something to do with the accountability to our history and the accountability to our community. And every Black church ain't about that. Everybody our color ain't our kind. Real talk, right? So,
and it's also good. Go ahead, Rodney.
Go ahead. I'm sorry. No. You can go ahead.
I just wanted to jump in and just say, and it's also important that we maintain the integrity of the Black church because it's a safe space for us.
Yeah.
We have to remember, like you said, our context. We're in America, and there are that many safe spaces where we can be in a position of power, a position of authority,
That's
a position of influence, and a position of comfort and fellowship, one with another, where we are on equal planes, regardless of our socioeconomic status, our educational status, etc. So there's something to be said about maintaining the existence of the Black church as it is, but now it's a matter of reimagining who we are and what we can do, because the demographics are shifting and changing, and the economics in this country are definitely shifting and changing, and civil rights are up for discussion right now in our country, in our government. So how can we as a Black church help to influence, with all the power that we've had historically, continue to maintain that power and unify in such a way that we can ensure our rights as a Black people, part of the Black church, whether we want to be or not, can still advance forward and not compromise our well-being in this particular country?
That's a huge question you asked, Katina. It's an outstanding question that I've been wrestling with lately, because what does a multicultural church mean for Black people?
Right.
I don't know if we're gonna wrestle with that tonight, but in a future date, teaser, what does that mean for for the Black church when everybody want to be multicultural? I'm telling you, we got to deal with
that. Is that not where we should be trying to head, though? I'm just saying, okay, because this is one of my struggles, and I'm gonna present the other side. Like, yes, I'm all for the Black church, but I think because race is such a social construct, and the way race and ethnicity has been weaponized and used as a weapon in this country, should not all of our goal be to have that church that isn't about race, about ethnicity, about class, but is what we would assume heaven would look like, right? Which is just the body of believers coming together to worship, coming together to do the work of God in, we all should be having the same goal. And I think that was one of the most disheartening parts to me is, we started seeing churches look more diverse and having white, Black, and different ones, only to see this split happens once we start talking again about race. Then we started finding out that some of these white pastors over Black congregations are Trump supporters and Trump's personal pastor, right? So we got the shock that, oh, you pastoring us, but you still over here supporting someone who doesn't care about our dehumanization in these streets. And I think that was what became even more shocking, because it almost felt like in some spaces we were getting to that utopia that we were hoping for, right? That you can come into the church and it be about kingdom building, kingdom serving in the land, regardless of what it looks like. So there ain't gonna be a Black section in church. Heaven, as much as we probably will want a hood section in heaven, I doubt there will be one, right? Be like, but what golden street you going down on? Nah, they already lifted the goal off my street, so we just got platinum on the other street. And like, it ain't gonna be like that, right? It ain't gonna be the familiar things we know of hood. It's just going to be believers. And isn't that when Jesus says, your will be done as it is in heaven on earth, aren't we supposed to be pushing for the kingdom of God to be on earth as it is in heaven? And in heaven, all of this ain't this ain't what it's supposed to be.
Well, I listen to what you're saying, and I think that I've always gone to churches until I was called to the church where I pastor now. I've always gone to churches where we've had a couple of white folks here and there. They were members, they were members, longtime members. One church, a deacon, and 2 churches. There were white deacons. They weren't recruited. I'm not going out recruiting white folks. I say I need a couple of white folks here, so let me do what I got to do.
You didn't have enough.
I'm not recruiting based upon race. Although we do have to deal with the social realities, and one of the social realities is Black church, a lot of Black people. I don't know what the data might say. I have no empirical data, but a lot of Black people go to churches with other Black people. And the social reality is there's some things that you may not have to map. Although I understand what you're saying, reality is this is how a lot of folks feel comfortable. Of course, the issue then becomes, do we have to go to church with one another every day? Does every church have to be multicultural? which, a lot of times, if, may end up being more dominion theology, like you were mentioning, than any sort of liberative, inheritor of Black church traditions, which there could be churches that are multicultural, but they hold tight and hold fast to traditions that they got from congregations that were part of that particular institution from years gone by. There's no reason why more churches, why Black liberation theology is not the first liberation theology. So why would there even be any sort of church that doesn't look toward a liberative gospel, no matter what the people look like? This is what the Jesus message ought to be. No matter what your social context, you ought to be able to map to the good news of the gospel, which is salvation, but it's also that Jesus cares for you. God is for the human creature. Going back to election and salvation, my advanced theo elective with Bozo. God is for the human creature in Christ Jesus. So, if that isn't a message that can be preached from any pulpit across the world, then I don't know what is. And I think that is the issue.
But Fred, the most segregated place in the country on a Sunday is the church. Because
that is because we live in a segregated society.
Why do all the Black children eat at the lunch table? Why are all the Black kids sitting alone? What was it, Beverly Daniels Tatum? Former president of Spelman College. We self-segregate. And since I live in New Jersey, where we've got home rule of 71 different municipalities in the county of Bergen, and you have every one of them, it has their own school board for the most part. They set their own local rules. And, we've got this legacy of real estate ownership where you couldn't buy homes in certain communities. You couldn't sell a home to a Black family. And then the taxes are high enough to keep people out of certain areas because there is racism in the world. And Black wealth is not where Black wealth is here. White wealth is 10 times higher than that. So now we have to deal with that social reality. And that plays out in church as well. But we don't necessarily all have to go to church with each other if we are still believing the Jesus message and can work and organize. The question is other churches, other congregations, or other faiths, we talked about this a little bit last week, other faiths or no faith, can we organize? Can we organize with the people that decided they wanted to go into the street, but they don't have a church tradition? Like I asked the question, and I was thinking about it as Katina was speaking, is it necessary for the Black church to claim or assume that people in the street are proclaiming some godly message, right? Is it for us to map onto them our religion based upon liberation and our shared and collective understanding that Black lives matter, which is not universally accepted in Black churches. I hate to say it, but that's just the truth. So are we able to organize with people who may not share all of our beliefs and then be able to tell them about the Jesus I know, whether they know Jesus or they say, well, that was just some guy?
Right. Uh-oh, Rodney.
Is not that
good. That's good.
Post George Floyd's murder on national television, folks during the pandemic of COVID-19, without any one charismatic leader, were marching all over the globe for Black Lives Matter.
Yes, they were.
If that ain't the church to me, I don't know what is. I'm just saying. For me, that's what it looks like. Because we saw the intergeneration of the movement. We saw ethnic, interracial. We saw intercultural. We saw folks who are able and diversely able. Right there. And you can't tell me that or convince me that that's not the move of God.
Yeah.
I didn't say that though. I didn't say it wasn't. I didn't say it.
Because like the pastor down in St. Louis said, they might not have been in Ferguson. The church might not have been in the forefront, but they were showing up, marching and praying. So they took a place in the movement. It just wasn't out there in the front row of the movement. And to me, I tell you what, that looked more like the church than January 6th. I tell you that much. And they Christians too, by the way. And they need liberation too. And the God, you would hope the gospel can liberate them as well. But they don't even know they need liberation.
Right.
No. They prayed on the Senate floor.
And then we talk, we have to get back to this doctrine of soteriology and what that means. Tisa, because you mentioned salvation. And somebody, you put up a quote that we are forgetting the churches for the salvation. Oh, listen, we need to really, really, really ask ourselves, what does salvation look like? Because salvation ain't just about getting to heaven for me. All right. The whole First Testament, ain't nobody trying to get to heaven. The Jews ain't never was thinking about getting to no heaven at all. Their salvation, stand still and see the salvation of the Lord, was liberation in the here and now. It was all about salvation right now. Listen, I'll give you another example. Thank you, Holy Ghost.
Come on, preacher.
I'm ready to preach, Rodney.
Look, when you look at the gospel according to Luke and the certain Samaritan, that story was started by someone asking Jesus, what must I do to receive eternal life? Go read it when you get a chance. Please watch what Jesus does not do. He does not tell him what he told Nicodemus. For God so loved the world that he gave his own. That ain't what he told the dude. He does not tell him, I lay down my life. Nobody takes it from me. He don't tell him, my sheep know my voice. He don't use it. He doesn't tell him, I am the way, the truth, and the life. You know what he tells him? He gives him a story about a man left for dead.
Yeah.
And received help from the most unlikely one to get the help, because us religious folks we was too clean to touch the almost dead person. We had to pass them by because we too concerned about our own life. We passed people left for dead by. But the certain Samaritan, Jesus at the end of the story says, well, who showed mercy? The one who blah, 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 showed mercy. The one that showed mercy, right? Then Jesus said, go and do likewise. Don't forget how that story started. What must I do to receive eternal? So you tell me what salvation is.
That doesn't mean that there's not more to that story.
He told Nicodemus.
I think what we take from that, the truth that we take from that, because I'm not giving up salvation through Jesus Christ. I'm not giving that up. But what I'm saying,
heaven ain't real. And I'm not saying heaven ain't real.
Check this
out.
All
I'm saying is, don't wait till to get to the Bible. I'm not going to stay docile and stuck and obedient, waiting to get free to get to heaven.
None of that. Nobody. That's not even on the table.
That's not even on the table.
Yes, it is.
Here's the thing.
White folks is on the table.
Here's the thing. I'm not a whole lot of white folks. Here's the thing I'm telling you. What I'm saying is, if you can't love your neighbor, it probably can be called into question whether or not you love God. If you can't do the things if you can't do the things that Jesus is pointing toward, Jesus spends a lot of time. See, I put it this way: Jesus could have come and died on the first day. You don't need the rest of that time. You don't need the eating with the sinners. You don't need the loving of the people for that. You don't need that, right? So here now you have a Jesus that spends that time and then says, these are things you have to do. If you can't do that, can you really believe in your heart and confess with your mouth that Jesus Christ is Lord if you can't love the people? So now my point all through that is, I don't know what the people in the streets all around the world were believing, because I was not in the streets all around the world. The folks in France, I can't tell you what the folks in France were really talking about, what really got them out there. I know that the Spirit was moving. Matter of fact, I preached a sermon around that time talking about Pentecost as the Spirit moved and tongues of fire and languages are being spoken and everybody heard this. I don't know that none of that, I'm not saying any of that wasn't a move of God. What I'm saying is we have to be particular about what we're talking about, Black church, with all of these things going out here. And all of these people making actions, do we need to map onto them our whole ideology and belief? Because everybody don't believe in this Jesus. Some folks don't know the story. That's all I'm saying. But if you can't proclaim, if you can't show that you love somebody else in the love ethic, if you can't live out, as Thurman says, the love ethic of Jesus, right? I question whether or not, if I can't live out the love ethic with nobody, I question whether or not I've actually believed in my heart, though I might have confessed with my mouth. That's my point.
Right. We got to get Katina in here. The people are demanding to be heard. To hear from Katina.
Now, I want to stay true to Fred's question, which was with the protests. There are people that were out there in the streets who don't necessarily profess Christ.
That's right.
But that doesn't take away from their wanting to see liberation for Black people.
That's right.
And so
That's
I think that when we start talking about the Black church, that's a different part of the conversation, because there are two distinct movements that are happening. There is liberation of Black people in the world, but then there's salvation of Jesus Christ. And I think they're separate and distinct and cannot necessarily be interrelated, because that would be disrespectful to all of the others who are out there who profess their own gods, but still have a love for all of humanity. And that to me tells me that then there's a separate and distinct role for the Black church in this movement that's out here in physical reaction to everything that's happening to Black people in America and probably most likely around the world. Right. But here it's just so distinct because of the racism that we see. We know Black people are being persecuted all over the world, and some Black people are being persecuted by other people that look just like us in the world. But right. Here in America, it's Black people being persecuted because of the very nature and color of our skin is the issue. Right. I think that we are doing a disservice to say that everybody in the Black Lives Movement is part of the Black church. I think that we're represented as a segment of the movement, right. But we can't lose fact that we are the Black church and we profess Jesus Christ. And I'm very clear, I am a gospel preacher. Without Christ, there is no salvation. And salvation means eternal life for me. That's how I have defined it. That if you profess Christ, you shall be in all of eternity with God, in the very presence of God. And so I'm not gonna preach because I'm almost finished ranting. But I just want to emphasize that even as the Black church, we can be ecumenical in our approach to equity and equality in America. That we can stand along our Jewish brother and our Muslim sister and our Rastafarian brother and sister and our Buddhist and Hindu brothers and sisters and say, we need freedom and equality for everybody in this country, because this is a country that should embrace religious freedoms, period. That's one of the First Amendment rights. So we can't go out with this Christian nationalism and profess it to be Christianity when it's really white supremacy. And we can't profess to be only for those who love Christ when the goal is that all of us should have our civil rights and our human rights in this country, because we all don't have it. Right now, we just saw the House pass the bill for the LGBTQIA plus community. Why are we still passing laws for rights that were already in the Constitution? Why are we looking at 43 states coming up with legislation to hinder voter rights? Voter suppression is now on an all-time high, trying to figure out how we can disenfranchise Black voters, voters of color, young voters, poor voters, the uneducated voters, so that our constituents of another group can remain in power, because they're slowly and quickly losing it. So now 2022, we're looking at how we can disenfranchise more voters so that their voices can't be heard. This is the fight that I'm talking about. So I'm with Rodney. We need some salvation here on earth, but I'm not going to lose the fact that salvation in Jesus Christ will get you to heaven.
Oh, absolutely.
Wait.
I'm not denying that. Don't get me wrong. I'm not denying that at all.
This is what you talked about, Rodney, particularity, right? And so for me, this is where I start feeling my sense of particularity. Because I'm a church girl, born and bred, okay, when we start throwing around the term of what is church, I think there is a particularity when we start defining things as church. And this is why I think we started having an identity crisis, because people started throwing the term, well, they're having church, they doing church, this is church here, church, and so now, then what is the Black church really? Because you can find a Black church in the middle of the street. So I have issue with that, because there's still a particularity that comes for me personally with church, period. For me, with church, period, is upon this rock I build my church, which is upon the confession that Jesus Christ is the Son of God. I don't care about, if you're gathering over there. Nobody's saying that's not a good thing. Nobody is saying that you can't still do God's work, but that still don't make you church. And that's just where I'm at. And I think our identity is being siphoned out in other spaces as if they can replace us because they're doing similar work to us. We can all be doing liberation work for the liberating of our physical selves, the liberating of our social justice, equity, all of that. We could all be doing it. But what makes us particular is the fact that we got the real answer. We got the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords that we are professing. And it's because of that makes us distinct from anybody else. So
Preach, Lisa.
Come on. I get particular when we start saying who's having church and where they having it at. If Jesus Christ ain't the center of your message in that particular space, you're doing God's work, yes. But I don't know if you're having church. So I just think, but I think while it might feel ancillary, but I think this is part of what we're struggling with, because so many people are claiming to be what we are because they're doing similar work. And I think we have to reestablish what makes us different. Yes, we are with the Black Lives Matter movement, and not necessarily because I don't really know the founders but we're with the fundaments of the movement, right? Because that's biblical. We're in the push for the liberation, but you can't just be us. There's a particularity that comes with the Black church that I think we have to reestablish so that we can regain our relevancy in the community. People don't think we're relevant because they will, like they said, well, I don't need you to help me get a house. I got my own house now. I don't need you to help me do this. I got this. I don't need those same needs in the same way, right? So the more money I make, the less I need church, because I don't need the church to meet my needs. All my needs are being met because I have those resources, right? So then we have to, again, reestablish you can have all the money in the world. You still need Jesus.
Right.
Yes, you do.
You still need Jesus, and you need Jesus in every aspect of your life, because you get right in that fancy car and get racially profiled and find yourself dead on the side of the road, right? So I just think that particularity, if we're going to maintain our identity as the Black church, has to be core and center.
That's why I asked that question.
Yeah. Well, you know what? One thing I agree with you on that, Tisa, and really that was where I was coming from with respect to, are we trying to say everybody there is doing the same work that we're doing? But the important thing is not just drawing our distinction between the two, but also saying, well, what of the work that they're doing do we now need to make sure that we are participant in? Because some folks can't run away from Black Lives Matter fast enough. Within a Black church context. And, again, someone said it earlier that we're not monolithic, and that's true. Matter of fact, we haven't settled within ourselves, or perhaps haven't settled with the right and liberative answer, the whole civil rights question. which is something that the documentary brought up. But it cannot be argued that we as an institution have come to a place where we have settled our issues with sexual and gender equality, because quite honestly, we have not perhaps even scratched the surface on some of that. So when we say safe spaces, I just saw something today that really struck at me. Declaring a space as being safe is really a function of talking to the people who are in the minority and asking them, do you feel safe in this situation? And can I help you to make sure that I keep you protected? Because that is a work that I ought to be doing. And I don't know that every Black church is a safe space, because I've heard too much about people who've been hurt because of how they identify and who they are. So that's, just something for us to think about too, as we go across the spectrum. What do we need to kind of work on internally as we focused in on Black Lives Matter? And I think somebody said it before, all Black Lives Matter. Yes. Do all Black lives matter to the Black Christian church? And I think that that's a question that we're trying to solve.
That's a good question.
I think when we talk about the Black church, I think we're talking about the moral authority in our Black community. And I think when we talk about the Black church, we're talking about how to meet the spiritual needs of the Black community. So when we talk about safe space, and I'm not going to deal with all the isms when we talk about safe space, because I agree with Pastor Fred that safe space is not safe for all Black lives, but for the majority, church is a safe space for us to be free to be. And I'll say, when COVID hit, there were a lot of Black people who were looking for the moral authority of the church to rise up. And when the doors and the buildings were closed, people were actively seeking out how to stay connected in our place of community, not just for the ability to connect, but to have relationship and understand what's God saying to us in this time.
Right.
Because we are afraid.
Right.
In 2020, we had a leader who was crazy and clearly lost his mind. And I didn't realize how crazy he was until I was listening to those press conferences every day. And I said to myself, God, what in the world have we gotten ourselves into here? And so you were looking to hear from the prophets and the preachers and the prayer warriors to say, what is God saying to us in this time? I need to connect with somebody who has an ear to heaven to tell me what's happening in my life, my family's life, in my community, and how we can stay connected and stay close to the vine. And so I think if we stay focused on that as we're reimagining what the Black church looks like, if we can just stay close to the vine and hear what God is saying to us in this moment of solace, in this moment of isolation, in this moment of quarantine, how can God rebuild, reimagine? How can God reestablish, reordain, reanoint, refresh, restore, renew all of us as the church, as the people of God? Because I believe that in this moment of quarantine, of isolation, when we can rise back up again, we're going to rise up with more power. We're going to rise up with more grace. We'll rise up with more mercy, more understanding, and a better connection, not just to God, but to each other. And I think God is using all of this to work it out for our good. Now, what does that look like? We don't know, but when I say this is a faith walk, like we really are walking in darkness, and we're walking truly by faith to see how God is directing us and leading us. And we're in each step, we're walking closer to light. Each step, it's like, okay, God is on the left, God is on the right. Listen to my neighbor, listen to my friend, and listening for the voice of God. We don't know how God's going to show up, what God will look like when God speaks. But if you know God, you'll know when God speaks. And if you know God, you know when God is using someone, whether they look like us or not, to speak truth to our situation. And I believe that's what the Black church will look like and continue to look like. That is our authority, that we are close to the vine.
All right, preacher. Let me. So then, with all of that said, because you, I have to admit, are way more optimistic than I am about how we will reemerge out of this. I gotta admit that you are definitely, and you have always proclaimed yourself to be a preacher of hope. Okay, so you definitely are more hopeful.
Healing is the only agenda. Healing is the only agenda, right?
Yeah, the only.
Church
Let's be clear, the only agenda, because if you don't get healed, every other agenda you have going to get usurped, right? So let me just say this to end us. We got only about 5 minutes, and I'm going to ask each of you to answer this question. What is the biggest thing? And to all of what Katina said about us being in this space that almost feels like the wilderness, that feels like this dark space, like I call it the Great Reset, right? I believe that God shut us down to give us an opportunity to reset for a new day. Can we perceive that He is doing a new thing? If that is indeed the case, what do you think is going to be the biggest thing the Black church is going to need to be able to do when we start to really reopen fully like we were before? What's the biggest thing you think we're going to need to reset, or the biggest thing we're going to need to do that will help us rise to this new occasion, but also be different because the world is now different?
I don't know about the biggest thing, but I think that one thing we would have to come to realize is that we're in emergency situations. I just kind of feel as if we've been almost asleep at the wheel until 2016, not really realizing just how precarious a position Black people are in this country and around the world. I know there are people that have a lot. There are people who have, we got more Black billionaires now than we did 4 years ago. And that's great. But none of that does anything for my community right now. So how is it that we need to act that, okay, you can come in here and shout and then go home and come back here next week and be prepared to shout again. But we can't just be a 1 day, 2 hour a week institution. If we are going to tell ourselves the great stories of the past, we might have to then actually do some of the struggle, that's lived through some of the struggle, some of the fundraising, some of the activity that these churches went through, because they knew that folk were catching hell. And that's where we are right now. People are catching hell in our communities, and we better get on board, because AI is going to mean a lot of folks don't get jobs in the next economies. And if we don't move now, we will lose a position, and we are going backwards and not forwards.
So wow. I would say this. I was watching the Black Panther again last week, and at the end, King T'Challa, he made a most profound statement I think we need. He said, in the time of crises, the wise build bridges, fools build barriers. We are in a time of crises.
Yeah.
We don't have time to be reasoning with evil. We ain't got time to be dealing with them folks who even claim Christianity, by the way.
Right.
We ain't got time to be reasoning with them folks.
Right.
It's time for us to be wise and not mess with those who ain't gonna be at the table, and be more concerned with who is gonna meet us at the table. And that's serious about not just Black bodies, because Black bodies always mattered as commodity. Black bodies are always mattered as entertainers.
Right.
But Black lives has really never mattered.
Wow. So, I love that distinction.
Let's build. I heard Jeremiah Wright make that distinction the other day, so let me give him that credit. But let's build bridges as wise people with who is going to be on board with us, and not waste no more time trying to convince fools.
Wow.
And by the way, real quick, I want us to know that this week was a tough week. because 2 days ago was a year that Ahmaud Arbery was killed.
Yeah.
Tomorrow will be 9 years Trayvon Martin was killed.
Yeah.
Let's keep them names in mind, and let's not let their lives let's not let them ever stop breathing, and keep reminding and saying their names.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Teese, Katina, and Fred.
Yeah. This has been awesome. Awesome. My parting comments would just be that we have to remember that the church represents life. The church represents hope. The church represents a place of prayer and supplication, a place where we can be in relationship and connection with an almighty God, and then in relationship and connection with those who are the true church. And I'm not talking about these fake Christians. I'm not talking about the namesakes. I'm talking about those who represent the way, the truth, and the life.
Yeah.
And so when we remember the church being those who follow Jesus Christ, then we will experience what true love, unconditional love, divine agape love looks like and represents here in the earth and then in heaven. And
Yes.
I am humbled to have been a part of these last 3 series with you, Fred, with you, Rodney, and I love you with all my heart. Tisa, you all are brilliant scholars, brilliant genius minds, and it's been an honor and a pleasure to be here with all of you. God bless you.
Listen, the honor is all ours.
Amen.
People from watching Tisa's Rants and Musings, I thank you guys for tuning in. Please share it. It's just great conversation to be had. There's a lot of talking going around, but not everybody's talking about meaningful things, things that have substance and that really have real implications for us as a community. So I thank you, each of you, for being with us this month. We're moving into Women History Month, so Katina will be back if she don't mind. We're going to have her come back and bring some fire too, because we got to get the sisters' voices on the table. So brothers, we hope you continue to watch as well. And as some of you know, that God has opened the door for Tisa's Rants and Musings to air on the Inspired Living Network. Yay! So the official launch is coming soon. What it will be is, if you missed it on Thursdays or you haven't seen some of the shows will re-air on the network. So hopefully, listen, I need y'all to pray with me. I need y'all to help me with my social media as well. Okay, so if you haven't liked TJ Nance Ministry Facebook page, please do so. Go subscribe to my YouTube channel, which is at #Healing's the Only Agenda, because that will help us get the word out that they need to watch on Thursdays at 9, okay? Because we are talking some good stuff. God bless you all. I appreciate you. And we will see you next week for Women's History Month. Take care.
Peace.
Thanks, Tisa.